everybody, today's video is going to be the top 3 heroes to play for each position in 7.32D, and we're going to talk about exactly why I recommend these heroes.
Banana slam jam.
So starting off with the carries, we're going to go with number 1 position is Naga Siren. I talked about how strong she was during the TI patch, and I believe she's still the strongest carry and most reliable. What makes her so reliable is she has 2 different builds, the Manta Orchid build for the pacing, as well as the Yasha Radiance build to scale. What this hero does so well is she just consumes the entire map of farm, easily getting 800 to 900 GPM if you have a decent start. And what that allows her to do is basically get 6 slotted by like 35 minutes, and it seems pretty reliable, and there's a lot of little tricks you can do to like cut creeps in the early game against bad matchups, and it just feels like even if she's against counters, the Radiance build will solve them. And it's been incredibly reliable for me. All you have to do is kind of work on the illusion micro. There's a lot of efficiency to go there. If you're willing to put in the effort, Naga Siren will 100% pay off. Next up, the new carry trend is Carry Lena. She's like the new Drow sniper. What the build is people are going Null Talisman, Falcon Blade into Maelstrom. And it's usually Brown Boots, Maelstrom, BKB into Boots of Travel afterwards, and then items like Silver Edge, Satanic. What you'll realize about the build is that you're going 1-4-4 and you're leaving Dragon Slave at one point. And the whole point of Dragon Slave is to keep your Fiery Soul stacks up with costing the least amount of mana. So the idea is that you're able to run around the map farming, participating in fights, pretty much relying on very small mana regen from the Falcon Blade and the Null Talisman, but you'll always have the stacks up, and the Maelstrom compensates for the Dragon Slave. And you'll see that your output of damage in the middle of fights is massive, and you can even go like a second or third item Gleipnir to help set up your stun, utility in team fights, all that kind of stuff. But the BKB before the Boots of Travel is almost always crucial because this hero without a BKB is pretty much paper at any stage of the game. And for our third carry, I highly recommend Drow. I think Drow, Sniper, and Clinks are relatively interchangeable. I think all of these ranged agility carries have pretty solid reliability in the laning stage, but also the way they scale just seems ideal. A lot of the mids are kind of go-in heroes for you. A lot of the heroes in the 4 position are also initiators, and having a backline damage dealer, it just feels the easiest to execute team fights, and also it feels really strong in the early laning phase. Just more reliable dealing with counters. I've had much better experience with ranged heroes so far this patch, other than Naga Siren, than I have with melee. Moving on to the 2 position, number 1 slot for me is the Ember Spirit. Out of all the spirits, I think he's the most reliable. His laning stage, you can go the Sleight of Fist, Searing Chains build if Flame Guard's not reliable, or you can just max out the Flame Guard and play for farm. What I like so much about Ember is that he builds damage with the Maelstrom. He can split push, usually going phase Maelstrom BKB, and he has Kaya Sanj as like a BKB substitute if he wants to focus more on farming. And in the mid to late game, there's so many different routes you can go. You can go the Gleipnirs, the Ags, the Shivas. You can even go more damage-oriented builds with like a Daedalus. But the way this hero scales is that he farms on his own, connects to fights, and it just feels like his game plan always goes accordingly. Next up in the mid lane is a repeat. Got ourselves Lena coming in also at the 2 position. She fills a similar role in the game, ranged damage dealing farmer, but instead of being the Falcon Blade Maelstrom build, you have the bottle for mana regen, and you got to rely much more on tempo. So we're going for the Falcon Blade into BKB bots or bots BKB, standard Lena items afterwards. So the biggest thing about carry Lena compared to mid Lena is that early game, mid Lena will have higher levels, be able to participate more relying on her nukes, while carry Lena is focused on jungling and playing off map. But both hit the same timings later on in the game. The biggest thing about Lena is she pretty much just doesn't lose any of her lane matchups if played properly. So you can pick her early on in the draft and reliably have a decent laning stage. Next up, a hero that's risen in popularity in the mid lane recently has been Tuskar. A lot of people are going for the heavy nuke build, maxing out the ice shards and the snowball before the tag team. It allows you to go for more of a wave clearing, like low cooldown ganking build, and then later on you turn into this massive damage dealer with BKBs, Desos. I've seen ACs, Bashers, Silver Edges, Ag Scepter if you're having issues, like you want to kick somebody away from the rest of their teammates. It's basically a punch hook that's more reliable, but you have to put your hero in a bit of danger. It just feels like with the whole new 440 build that it's allowing Tusk to get the farm that he didn't used to have. And this hero with very few items can pretty much one-shot people. So definitely keep an eye out for Tusk as a new mid laner, similar play style to Tiny, but he scales more with the Walrus Punch damage rather than the Avalanche Toss combo damage. Moving on to the 3 position, number 1 slot, we got Razor still. I think the Bloodstone build is still really nice, but however, I think people are getting a little bit too baited by always going the Bloodstone build. Just keep in mind that if the Bloodstone build relies on the opponent having to be point blank range and you healing more than the damage that they do. So if it feels like they're going to kill you from afar with heroes like Drow, Sniper, Lina, these are some of his worst matchups, then consider just going the classic, like the Treads, BKB, refresher sort of build that we saw coming out from Amar earlier last year. So as long as you feel a little bit flexible on your builds, I think Razor can account for pretty much every situation in his games. Just make sure you try to have a melee 4 position with it, because he does want that frontliner in lane. Next up, the cheesiest of all cheese heroes right now, Broodmother still feels incredibly strong. Even with the nerf to Wraith Pact, I've seen Orchid builds, I've seen Pipe builds. This hero still consumes the entire half of the map that she's playing. I'd say her worst matchups are like Spirit Breaker, Pangolier, Bristlebacks, but most of these heroes can't kill you solo, and it requires a lot of coordination from the opponent team. So really focusing on invading the opponent's jungle as early as possible, taking their tower when the carry leaves, is all what Broodmother does. I think she's especially better on Radiant because she sets up her team to take Roshan super early on in the game, just because that's where she's already playing when she's off lane for Radiant. And in the 3rd slot for off lane, a hero I've been having awesome success with has been Doombringer. A lot of people think of Doom as like a phase BKB Blink type of hero, throwing in a Midas in there, but 33 pioneered a new build where you play the lane with Mana Boots and a Midas. It allows you to spam Devour off cooldown. If you often get a creep spell like the Harpy Lightning Storm ability, you can even dominate lanes sometimes. The buff to Scorched Earth makes it so as you're maxing it out in the laning phase, you can kind of kite people around with it, and it just does so much damage that most carries, even heroes like Slark and Ursa, can't bring you down fast enough as long as you're kiting them effectively. So he has a really good start to the laning phase with the Mana Boots build, and a lot of people are just going straight like Octarine BKB after the Midas. So you're not as much of a blink initiator as a guy that just occupies an area, makes it really hard to gank you. Nobody wants to solo against you because you can just doom them. And then later on in the game, you have the Ags, the doom cooldown talent at 20, and you just get insane farm. The biggest thing that makes this hero conceptually broken is you want to be thinking about how much of the map each team is farming, and because his Devour as well as the Midas turns a small amount of creeps into even more gold, Doom's perfectly content just 50-50ing the map with the opponent, and he forces the opponent to make moves. So if you can think about, like, as long as your team is farming, you can make so much more money than the opponent just by splitting the map evenly. In the 4 position, another repeat, we got Tusk. Tusk has multiple skill builds in the 4 position. We've even seen the 4-4-0 build sometimes, but a lot of times 4 position Tusks will lean towards tag team. A lot of the time it has to deal with whether or not your mid or off lane are ranged heroes with high attack speed benefiting from the tag team. If that is the case, you'll usually want to max that out. But just being a low cooldown ganker that can basically catch any vulnerable targets out, a lot of these tanky guys like the Razors and the Vipers, even the Doom that we just mentioned, they just melt to tag team because tag team makes any lineup do a significant amount of damage in the mid game. So look to be picking Tusk if you're dealing with early to mid game tanky heroes that you're just struggling to bring down from the support role. And next we got Tiny. I feel like this hero is always relevant. Best displacement hero right now. It's really hard to go high ground against him. Him +1 is always a kill. The Avalanche Toss combo is strong as ever. The only thing you got to be careful of is your team perhaps farming a bit too greedy, because Tiny does need to find time in the game to stop back to farm for a Blink Dagger. Having the Blink before 20 minutes will make a massive difference on your impact in the game. But the thing is, you can scale with utility with items like 4-stab Yules to keep yourself and your teammates alive, or if you guys are having some damage issues, support Tiny can often just go Ags Daedalus later on in the game and basically become a 4th core. So you have multiple options in case your games are going later. Tiny's a great support to be picking for scaling. And out of all the ranged 4 positions right now, if I see the most Rubik in my bracket, as long as you feel confident to play Rubik. His laning stage feels incredibly reliable. He trades pretty well early on with the Fade Bolt spam, and then he's really good at soaking up creep waves, defending towers later on in the game, and his teamfight utility has always been unmatched in the 4 position. Heading into the 5 position, we will be promoting Ricky once again. I believe he is still the best 5 position, completely obnoxious, strong laner, and then eventually you are an invis, warder, and dewarder that can consistently scout out the opponent and set up with your dart. Usually the build is to have the shard as soon as possible after the 15-minute mark into items like Etherlands, Force Staff. Idea being, I want to play on the map as often as possible, keep myself alive, and dart people. It is surprisingly effective. It's basically a Bane Nightmare from Invis, longer range. So you're setting up for all types of things from your team. The only thing you got to be careful of is that Ricky has virtually no wave clear and cannot defend anything. So if your teammates seem to be not clearing waves or doing the farming aspect of the game, Ricky will struggle in those types of games. So since we mentioned the issue with Ricky being lack of wave clear, I think the number one hero to solve that in the support role right now is Jakiro. Feels incredibly strong in the laning phase and will be able to scale with objective taking as well as objective defense. It feels like he's really good at cleaning up the map, and he has multiple skill builds he can do, maxing out Liquid Fire for the tower push, or you can max out Ice Path if you feel like your team is limited on disables. I just love Jakiro. He just feels powerful at every stage of the game. I feel like I have influence, and I can build so many different ways to be impactful. And lastly, we got Silencer. After the nerfs to the AoE of Arcane Curse, I think he's still a very strong hero at every stage of the game. I especially like him in the support role because he lacks mobility and survivability to be a core at the highest brackets. Usually he'll get picked off and ganked, but the fact that his first and third spell combined still do a ton of damage, and then the global silence utility at every stage in the game never falls off. So I really like his laning stage, and if need be, you can scale with the shard in steel and become a carry of your own. And that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. Top 3 positions in every role to climb in 7.32 deep. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.